just what the Wolverines needed. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper into the corner. Waits for it. Yes, caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris hacks a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue, welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. My name is Steve Deace. Coming up this week, Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider will be joining us. Benny Jopru, former All-Big Ten tight end at the University of Michigan, will have the film breakdown of the Wolverines' victory over Rutgers. All that and a lot more to come here this week on Michigan Podcast. I want to thank our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast, which each week help us to get the word out about this episode. And thank you to all of you that subscribe here on YouTube or on iHeart or on iTunes. Really, we appreciate it. Please leave a positive review. It helps us to get the word out. Subscribe and share that link with everybody that you know. And until recently, when we had an invasion of Penn State fans who seemingly are incapable, too many of them, of actually having an intelligent conversation. Those Penn State fans notwithstanding, I do my best each week to engage as many of you in the comments section here on YouTube as I can. So keep those comments and questions coming. We love to talk the University of Michigan's athletic teams, particularly football and basketball, with you. And if you ever miss an episode, a podcast, anything we say, do, follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Visit our website, michiganpodcast.com. Well, I know it's just Rutgers. But Rutgers also came in with the exact same Big Ten record as the University of Michigan. And it was supposed to be just Air Force. And it was supposed to be just Cincinnati. And it was supposed to be just Purdue. And those games ended up being slobber knockers nonetheless. But Michigan finally got something it's been looking for several weeks now. A well-rounded football game. No frills, just solid football. Just physically dominating an opponent, a quarterback able to play within the frame of the framework of the actual offense, and that's exactly what the Wolverines needed. Keep in mind, only two teams have scored at least 30 points on Rutgers going into Michigan's game against them last Saturday. And the previous two teams are much more highly regarded offensively than are the Wolverines. You look at Washington, for example, likely has a pro quarterback and several other pros on its starting offense. And Ohio State's been a much more explosive offense than the Wolverines have been so far this season. Those are it. Those are the only two teams to score more than 30 points or 30 or more points against Rutgers this year. And the Wolverines put up 35, and they left points on the field, missing a field goal, missing what should have been an easy touchdown pass in the fourth quarter. But the big story, of course, was the debut of Brandon Peters. Now, I want to say one thing about this. I'm very excited about it. But the reason I'm excited about it is not because my expectations are high, but because they're not. See, we haven't even been getting competent quarterback play this year. Brandon Peters' QBR was 96. That's the best QBR for a Michigan quarterback since Wilton Speight against Maryland on November 5th, 2016, almost a year ago. In fact, Wilton Speight had not had a QBR over 65 this year. Like the Florida game Michigan won, his QBR was 33. Well, what about John O'Korn? He had that great debut coming off the bench against Purdue. Why isn't this like that? Well, one, Brandon Peters' QBR is almost 10 points higher than John O'Korn's was for that game. Two, we already had a body of work with John O'Korn. We kind of already knew what he could do, couldn't do. And when we saw him do those things against Purdue, we thought, well, is this the outlier? In fact, go back and watch the episode we did here on Michigan Podcast after Michigan's victory against Purdue. And what was the entire opening 15, 20 minutes of that episode? Is this the outlier for John O'Korn? Is this who he is now? Or was this just a guy playing out of his mind against the coach that cut him and benched him, essentially cut him, but benched him when he was at the University of Houston, Tony Levine, who's now the offensive coordinator at Purdue? Well, we got our answer in the next few weeks. That second half against Purdue, that was the outlier. But if you go back and watch that game, a lot of O'Korn's plays were street ball. Wasn't getting much out of the framework of the offense. Pretty much every play Brandon Peters made was within the framework of the offense. In fact, I would go so far as to say, here we are, 8 weeks into the season, and we finally played a game that looked like a Jim Harbaugh offense is supposed to look. Now, I don't think he's Sam Darnold, at least not yet anyway. Like, what do I mean by that? Well, USC's 1-3. They put Sam Darnold in. They don't lose a game the rest of the year. They win the Rose Bowl, transforms their season. I don't think we have anything quite like that. I don't think that, if we played Penn State again, we would win. What I do think, though, is we have, I think, the next 3 weeks, and I'm including Wisconsin. I think we have something I wasn't sure we had a week ago. And that's a fighting chance to win all those games. Because if we can just get competent quarterback play, competent with the way we play defense, with the way we're starting to run the ball the last few weeks, playing more man ball. And I thought the way we run blocked on Saturday was absolutely outstanding. With the way we play defense and can run the football, if we can just have a quarterback who's not a liability, who's not one of the best players on the other team's defense, which is what we've had most weeks here this season. If we can just get someone who can be competent, make a throw or two, let alone be good, then yeah, I think we have a shot. Because I think physically we're superior to Minnesota. Physically we're superior to Maryland, particularly with them having a third string and fourth string, depending on how you calculate it, quarterback in there now. And physically we're superior to Wisconsin. I mean, Wisconsin plays a lot of the same kind of football we do. We just do it with more talent. Now, if we go into that game and the quarterback is a liability, well, that's a problem. But if we go into that game and the quarterback is at least somewhat of a threat to do something, complete a pass past the line of scrimmage, yeah, that's how low my expectations are after the last few weeks, folks. Well, now we give ourselves more margin for error, particularly because Wisconsin's very limited on offense. They're not a big play offense. They don't really have big play guys on the outside. Manning up against them with our secondary is not the same as going man-to-man against the skilled position talent that Penn State has. I think we have a real chance to win the next 3. Now we find out, though, can he be competent? He's going to make mistakes. He's young. He's developing. But you know the difference between watching a highly recruited redshirt freshman make mistakes and a fifth-year senior make mistakes is the hope that they'll improve and get better. And as I said last week, if we're going to take our lumps, if this is going to be more of a rebuilding season than many of us had hoped, if it turns out we are just too young, and it turns out we are, then let's put Peters in there now. Let's find out what we have now, and let's have him grow along with the rest of this team. And that's why I have something I didn't have a week ago at this time. Hope. Hope Michigan can still do something significant this season, even in what appears to be a rebuilding season. Well, what do you think? Follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Also, Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider. He's going to tell us what he thinks next on Michigan Podcast. This portion of Michigan Podcast brought to you by Sport Court of Michigan. If you're looking to put the ball in your court, like how much would you like that maize and blue Jumpman to be your actual court? Well, Sport Court of Michigan, they can make it happen. From basketball to tennis to batting cages to hoops, if you need anything athletic in your backyard, just give them a call. They're based out of Michigan, and they're ready to install your court sooner than you would expect. If you are in the southeast Michigan area or in Ann Arbor, Tim Barnes will personally walk you through the process of having your dreams of a professional court in your backyard. Just visit him at sportcourtmi.com. Now, if you live outside of southeast Michigan and you need a hoop for your driveway or your yard, they've got you covered there too at monsterhoops.com. That's monsterhoops.com, and they'll ship it right to your door. Now, if you mention the Michigan Podcast to monsterhoops.com, you're going to save $100 on your purchase at monsterhoops.com. If you mention Michigan Podcast to sportcourtmi.com, you could save up to $1,000 on your backyard game court, depending on the package you have selected. So sportcourtmi.com, michiganpodcast.com, and for that discount, tell them that Michigan Podcast sent you. Back here on Michigan Podcast, we're joined by Michael Spath of WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider. Good to see you again. Michael, your overall thoughts on Michigan's win against Rutgers, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and where the team is at now heading into the final third of the season.
Well, I know we're going to talk a lot about Brandon Peters, and we should. But let's focus on a couple of other things that happened in that game besides Brandon Peters, and that was further maturation, growth of this offensive line. I thought Michael Onwenu, Ben Bredesen, I thought they had maybe their best game of the season in terms of run blocking. And Sean McCune and Zach Gentry both were really good in their run blocking schemes and in their execution. I was watching the film earlier this week with former tight end Benny Jopru, and he was really impressed with how far they've come along. And so I think there are a lot of positives that happened for this team beyond just the quarterback. And I think when you look at defensively, the secondary continued to play well. I think Devin Bush got a little bit closer to the player that we were seeing in the first 4 or 5 games of the year. He was flying to the football. Mike McCray obviously had a very tough game a couple weeks ago against Penn State and Saquon Barkley. And yes, the athletes weren't quite the same on this Rutgers squad, but I thought there were a lot of positives on the defensive side of the ball. The defensive line really got after the quarterback, and Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich had a couple of sacks apiece, and the younger guys started to get in there more. So there were a lot of good things that happened for this Michigan football team against Rutgers that needed to happen. They needed to get their confidence back. They needed to start playing better football, having more execution. And I think all those things happened last Saturday. And then there was the quarterback. Then there was Brandon Peters. And I know we're going to talk more about that, so I'll leave that for some conversations coming up here.
Let's table Peters for just a moment. I want to go back to what you said about this being a confidence booster. And, I mentioned the exact same thing, and I got a lot on Twitter this week of, well, it was Rutgers. Well, that's exactly, though, what Rutgers is supposed to be. Air Force was supposed to be a confidence booster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cincinnati was supposed to be a confidence booster. Okay? I mean, so this team looked a lot different than what we saw in those games. I think the quarterback situation we'll talk about in a moment had a lot to do with it. But this, I think, was a game, mentally, a young team facing its real first adversity as a program with a lot of these guys in primary positions of prominence now as part of the team. They needed, I think, a game like this. And the thing I would say about Rutgers is they're not very good. They're a lot better than they were last year, but they're not very good. But still, only 2 other teams had scored at least 30 points on Rutgers this year. One of them's Washington with a lot of NFL talent on their team and a very experienced quarterback to boot. And the other was Ohio State, who's a lot more explosive on offense than Michigan has shown to be so far this season. So I think it means quite a bit from the standpoint of when you're dealing with young people. Confidence, I think, is a big factor, Mike.
Well, Steve, I agree with you completely. And let's look at these 3 games that Michigan has, Rutgers, Minnesota, and Maryland, and look at 3 games of comparable talent competition. And that is after Michigan beat Florida to start the year, they had Cincinnati, Air Force, and Purdue. And what were those 3 games supposed to do? They were supposed to give this team some opportunity to play younger players. They're supposed to give this team some opportunity to work on things execution-wise offensively. They're supposed to give this defense more confidence. They're supposed to be build-up games to Michigan State, Indiana, Penn State, and give Michigan the best chance to be successful in those 3 games. Now, what we saw happen is we saw Michigan struggle against Cincinnati and Air Force and on the road against Purdue. They finally finished off Purdue once John O'Korn came in. The defense probably took a lot more out of those 3 games than the offense. The offense was struggling. The offense wasn't ready to be a team that, as we saw, could beat a good defense like Michigan State. And then you had the last, 2 out of 3 games, Michigan fell because the offense wasn't where it needed to be. The defense had some holes. Well, so now we have these 3 games. This is like a redux on the early part of the season. You have Rutgers, maybe Cincinnati. You have Air Force, Minnesota, Maryland, Purdue. And it kind of works out funny that 2 of them are at home and then the last one's on the road. And so what are those games going to do for you? Those games give you an opportunity to get yourself settled at quarterback. It gives you an opportunity to build the confidence, the technique, the execution, consistency of this offensive line. It gives you a chance defensively to get yourself back in the right spot, because then you're going to face your 2 biggest tests of the season at Wisconsin, home against Ohio State. So when someone looks at these 3 games and says, oh, they're nothing games, no, they're not nothing games. Look what Ohio State did with all their nothing games. Rutgers and Maryland and UNLV and Army. Right. They used all that stuff to get themselves situated properly so they could compete and beat Penn State. And that's where Michigan finds himself right now in this 3-week stretch.
And we get a lot of people that are fans of other schools that watch us every week. So I think I speak for Mike, and if I'm wrong, Michael, correct me. We're not saying Michigan's ready to go replay the Penn State game. That's not what we're saying.
No,
what we're saying is, clearly what we learned against Penn State is youth was going to be a bigger factor for this team than we thought. And we're really talking about what this team can eventually become when it plays Wisconsin and Ohio State at the end of the year. Can it get a significant win? What can it build on for the future? That's the context of a confidence builder that we're talking about. That I think. Do you think that's a good way of explaining it, Michael?
100%. I mean, I tell you what, if Michigan plays Penn State right now, Michigan still loses to Penn State.
Agreed.
If they play Michigan State right now, they're at home. You've got Brandon Peters at quarterback, and you can replay that game without rain, and Michigan knows what they know now. I think they've got a pretty good chance in the game. That doesn't mean that they're going to win. But looking at it, no one's erasing that Penn State game. Michigan got dominated in every facet of that game. But what you're talking about is getting this team ready for the final 2 games and giving themselves a chance to, let's face it, for me, when I look at this second half of the season, Michigan has to beat one of these 2 teams in Wisconsin or Ohio State. They do that, and they go out there and they go to maybe they go to a January 1st bowl game, maybe they get into a good bowl game, they win that, they finish the season 10-3. You can go into 2018 and say, look, the offensive line, we got some players there. The running backs, we can feel good about Cron Higdon and Kareem Walker. We got our quarterback, potentially the future. We've got a lot. The defense is going to be bigger and stronger and faster next year. There's a lot of things to get excited about. If they win these 3 games, but then they lose to Wisconsin and Ohio State, they limp into a bowl game, they either win or lose, I don't think the excitement level in the offseason is going to be there. The momentum's going to be there. The recruiting opportunities are going to be there. So this is a critical stretch for Michigan football, and this is a critical stretch, and I hope the fans understand that there's still so much to play for with this team right now.
Michael Spath with us from the Michigan Insider and WTKA in Ann Arbor here on Michigan Podcast. All right, let's transition now to the quarterback conversation with Brandon Peters, because I understand why people would say one of 2 things, maybe both. They would say, well, again, it's Rutgers. Secondly, they might say, well, John O'Korn came off the bench and was great against Purdue. So I looked at some of the actual numbers because, like you, I'm a data guy. And when you look at, first of all, if you watched the game, and if you're a non-Michigan fan, you probably didn't watch all of Michigan-Purdue or all of Michigan and Rutgers both. The way the offense looked was dramatically different. O'Korn was playing street ball. I mean, he was running out of the pocket. Purdue was losing coverage downfield, and he was finding guys through improvisation. Brandon Peters actually ran the offense. I mean, the offense, it wasn't as explosive, but in terms of its framework, Michael, in terms of the way it looked like it looked for a lot of last year. when the team was 9-0. It wasn't as explosive, but it looked like he was actually running the framework of the offense, and the numbers bear that out. I'm not a huge fan of all of ESPN's data metrics like FPI, which I kind of think is a farce, or the Jay Billis Index. I'm not a big fan of either. But I love the way they do the QBR because they use the same formula that is used in the National Football League. And Brandon Peters' QBR for the Michigan game against Rutgers was 96. To put that in perspective, that's the best QBR Michigan quarterbacks had since Wilton Speight had a 98 when they beat Maryland 59-3 on November 5th of last year. Even when O'Korn came off the bench and threw for 270 yards, his QBR was a good 10 points lower than Peters because he also threw an interception. He also took some sacks, and it measures all of that. I mean, I think that number speaks to, I'm not saying the guy that we found our Sam Darnold, who's going to be a redshirt freshman and change the season. But when you play defense the way we do and we're starting to man ball in the running game, brother, you mentioned the Michigan State game. If we just could have a competent quarterback, meaning someone that's not a liability at the most important position, I think, that changes the complexion of a lot of things for Michigan.
Yeah, when I look at it, and you're right, you brought up two great points, Steve, and that is it's Rutgers. And that is the fact that he came off the bench, similar to John O'Korn against Purdue. Now Minnesota has tape on him. Now Minnesota is going to design a plan of attack for him. And Minnesota has a much more, which is saying something, because Rutgers, for their pass rush was anemic, was awful. Minnesota's not much better, but it's better. And so they'll come after Brandon Peters. And there were some things in that game that Brandon Peters didn't do exceptionally well. If you notice, he didn't attack the middle of the field very much. Mm-hmm. There was a play where they ran play action where the skinny post was available, and he didn't go for it. Maybe he's trying to avoid the middle of the field a little bit. He had a play where he was throwing to, I believe, Donovan Peoples-Jones down the sideline before the Chris Evans touchdown that would have been a touchdown pass. He overthrew him. The Chris Evans touchdown pass was thrown a little bit behind Chris Evans. He wasn't perfect, but he made a lot of the smart plays, the simple throws. When he scrambled to the right, I thought this. Go back and watch John O'Korn, and John O'Korn does the same thing. He doesn't scramble to the left a ton, a little bit here and there, but he scrambles to the right a lot. And when he scrambles to the right, he takes this gigantic, almost like J shape, that he ends up about 20 yards behind the line of scrimmage. And then he tries to throw a pass to somebody, and he can't get anything on it. And so there's no chance of that being successful. You watch Brandon Peters, when he scrambles to the right, he runs parallel to the line of scrimmage. He's about 5 yards back from the line of scrimmage, and that gives him an opportunity to put something in his throws. We saw them do that to make a 15-yard pass to Sean McCune. Mm-hmm. We saw him get a 10-yard pass to Ty Isaac on plays like that. That's a big thing that I notice a difference. He's not happy feet in the pocket. When he feels pressure, he waited and waited and waited until it was absolutely necessary to escape. John O'Korn, and part of it is the fact that he got hit a lot. It's kind of like the Devin Gardner. Yeah. When he got hit so many times in 2013 and 2014, he got really happy feet. But John O'Korn would do like a first read, and I feel like he was feeling the pressure before it was necessarily there. And
you can almost count 2 Mississippi every time John O'Korn went back to pass. Yeah. Yeah,
he was taking off, and that you're talking about running the offense. Well, to run the offense, to run Jim Harbaugh's offense, you need a quarterback that's going to stand in the pocket for more than, as you said, 2 Mississippi. You need a guy that's going to go through his progressions, and sometimes, and Brandon Peters did this really well, go to his check down receiver. So there were a lot of really big positives, and I'll tell you the biggest positive that I saw out of the game on Saturday with Brandon Peters, and that was this. And when he came in the game, the energy for the offense changed.
Yeah, you sensed it. Yep.
And now that could have just been one series. But you know what? It turned out to be the second series that he was in there when they came down and scored again before the end of the half. And then they started the third quarter, and the energy was still there, and guys were making plays. The one thing that I've wanted, and the thing that I thought was so critically important to have Wilton Speight as a starting quarterback this year, is a veteran guy that's been there. They've got so many young wide receivers, young running backs, young tight ends. You needed someone that was going to elevate the play of those around them. And we never saw it from Wilton Speight, and we certainly didn't see it from John O'Korn. And when you look at the best quarterbacks, you use Michigan's greatest, Tommy Brady, and what he's done with New England with a bunch of nondescript athletes around him. Again, no one's saying Brandon Peters, Tom Brady, but great quarterbacks and the critical quarterbacks make players around them better. And for a 2.5 quarters on Saturday. That's what I saw from Brandon Peters. If we see more of that against Minnesota this weekend, that's going to be really exciting for this football team.
And to put it in perspective, I don't think Wilton Spate had a QBR above 65 this season before he got hurt. And when you also look at Peters, this is now, we addressed our non-Michigan fans watching. This is maybe where we want to address specifically the Michigan fans watching. Let's not blow this out of proportion either, all right? Because he's going to struggle. He's a redshirt freshman. I have a hard time believing Jim Harbaugh just didn't want to win enough and kept the guy who was clearly the best quarterback in practice all this time under wraps. I don't think either one of us believes that. So clearly, in fact, Jim even said after the game he was surprised. He himself was surprised at how well Brandon Peters played. And sometimes guys are just gamers. And maybe some of the things that have been reported out there on websites about Peters and him kind of being socially awkward and not growing up and watching him get passed over by O'Korn. You know, when you're that age, when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, man, you can grow up a lot in 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks when you're really confronted for the first time in your life with, I ain't the bomb. I'm not the best ever. I'm not the hostess with the mostest. When you really come to grips with the fact that there's always a bigger fish, a lot of times young men at that age can grow up a lot in a short amount of time. And when you look at Peters, he's going to struggle. But I think the difference between Peters' struggles and what we saw with O'Korn is one guy's a fifth-year senior. And the question always after the Purdue game, Michael, was always, is that an outlier? Because we've not seen him play like that his career at Michigan. We saw a lot of, even when Michigan was pass blocking well last year when he played, he was too Mississippi and out of the pocket. Okay, so we needed to know, was Purdue an outlier or was that who that guy is now? And we found out it's an outlier. With Brandon Peters, when he struggles, the book is not written on him yet. And so I think you can be more patient with him because you're watching a player develop.
Well, and you're precisely right. And when you look at that game last weekend, I mean, think about the one play, I believe it was before the Chris Evans touchdown, where he threw a rocket on a slant pattern to Grant Perry, but he led Grant Perry too far. It hit the safety in the hands. If the safety catches that ball, it's a pick six.
Yep.
And now we're talking about maybe an entirely different reaction to this game. Yep. He didn't make every perfect throw.
He missed probably a touchdown pass to McCune at the end of the game. He underthrew that by like 3 yards.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are going to be growing pains. And I think the thing that, you know, talking to a lot of head coaches, and I'm partial to Red Berenson because I covered hockey for a long time, and I used to always have great conversations with him. And he said, in a perfect world, when you're dealing with a freshman or a sophomore, you're getting 2 steps forward and you're going to understand there's 1 step back. Mm-hmm. And he's like, at those 1 step backs, he's like, what you hope it doesn't do is it doesn't cost you in hockey, it doesn't cost you a goal. It just leads to a scoring opportunity. In football, you're hoping that 1 step back is not an interception, a turnover that leads to a momentum-changing play. You're hoping that it's an incompletion, missing on a guy that could have led to a first down. But you're going to see some of that. I will guarantee you this, and you know this too, Steve, is that if he is the starter in the next 4 games for Michigan, that there are going to be turnovers, that there are going to be missed opportunities, that there are going to be some moments where you sit there and you want to grab your hair and pull on it and go, how did he miss that? And Jim Harbaugh is going to be frustrated. But what you hope is that every time he has one of those, there's those 2 steps forward, and that he puts this team in a position, to win these next 2 games, but then to just give them a chance in those final 2 games.
It's well said. Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider. Thanks for joining us this week on Michigan Podcast, Michael. Good to see you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We look forward to having you on the show this week also.
Yep. Going to be on there tomorrow morning. Looking forward to it. We'll see Michael again next week. Back with more in a moment. I get asked quite a bit, hey, what can we do to help you guys get the word out, support what you're doing? What could we do to get you guys to do more? Because we love what you do here each week. Well, you're getting a look right now at our Patreon page for Michigan Podcast. Now, we're doing this as a labor of love, but what's the first word in the phrase labor of love? Labor. And the labor is not cheap. The production team here, they're donating their time most weeks to do this unless we get some support on our Patreon page. In that case, then I'm able to convince them to keep doing it because I share it with them. So if you love what we're doing here at Michigan Podcast and you want to support us via Patreon, Want to thank those of you that have already done so. Really, you're doing a great job helping to cover the cost of putting this on each and every week. Patreon.com, Michigan Podcast. And if you become one of our, we'll take any support at all, but if you become one of our $5 a month supporters, you get access to my point spread picks exclusively each week, including the Michigan game, as well as our exclusive post-game podcast, Instant Reaction, following every Michigan game this fall. So support us, please, if you love what we're doing. Patreon.com, Michigan Podcast. All right, next up here on Michigan Podcast, Benny Jopru, all Big Ten Michigan tight end, joins Michael Spath and breaks down the film from last week's game against Rutgers. It's called Football 101.
Welcome to Football Film Review with Benny Jopru. I'm Michael Spath, and looking at the Michigan-Rutgers game. We're going to get to a lot of offensive plays, Benny's side of the ball here in a few minutes, but we're going to start off at 4:56 to go in the first quarter, and Rashawn Gary gets the sack. And Benny, you've been there before trying to block defensive ends, and it looks like Rutgers tries to use the cut block here on Rashawn Gary for no success.
Yeah, we've been talking about how well this defensive line uses their hands, and you see here Rashawn does a wonderful job using this technique to defeat the chop block. Puts his hands in the guy, sheds the blocker, doesn't let him get into his body by using his hands, gets around the edge, great leverage and great speed, bending around the corner here and getting some pressure on the quarterback. Mike McCray stays home, giving the quarterback nowhere to go, and eventually Rashawn Gary gets to him here.
Yeah, there's an absurd stat after the game that said that Chase Winovich and Rashawn Gary combined for, I think it was 24 quarterback pressures.
Well, that's an absolutely huge number, and both of them had a really, really good game.
Benny, 12:49 to go in the second quarter, and Michigan gets a big 20-yard gain from Ty Isaac, and it's got to be a good feeling when your backside pulling guard gets out and there's nobody to block because the front side, the right side of the offensive line does its job so well here.
Yeah, it's a really good job here. Gentry starts it off here with a really great block. He ends up putting his man on the ground. Allows no penetration, so allows all the pulling guard and the pulling tackle to get out front to lead the convoy. Bushel Beatty does a nice job getting on his guy, getting in the way of the safety or corner, defensive back coming off the edge. And then McEwen does a really good job standing on his guy downfield, as does Grant Perry. Everyone on a guy here. And Ty Isaac running really hard, gets down to the 1-inch line and almost gets in.
Grant Perry, too, he takes a little peek over his shoulder to see where the guy's coming so that he knows to block him out towards the sideline, right?
Yeah, I would think he's taking a peek. He's sensing that the play isn't over yet, so he's kind of trying, and he's also trying to see what's going on. But great job blocking downfield by all those guys as well.
And unfortunately, just after Michigan scores, Rutgers scores, and this is something that's been giving them some trouble, and we've talked about it, Benny, the last couple of weeks, is when they line up somebody other than the quarterback under center. And here's Denorian Grant, a Percy Harvin-type wide receiver running back that takes a direct snap and ends up going about 50 yards for a touchdown.
Yeah, well, Michigan's been struggling a little bit, period, with the read option. I mean, I wouldn't say struggling, but the majority of the big plays have either been off the quick screen or the read option, and the same is true here. They line up in the Wildcat, line the quarterback out wide to the left there, and just a really nice athletic cutback by the Rutgers running back here, receiver. And you can't really blame anyone for this play. It's just another guy on the other team making a really, really nice cutback and takes to the house pretty much untouched.
And Michigan's made the quarterback change, and Brandon Peters completed his first pass to Tyron Wheatley on play action, and now Michigan runs what you think is 4 verticals. Is his first look? Is he supposed to be going to Poggi first, or is this a check down that shows some development of a quarterback early on in his career?
No, you can see the 4 verticals here. It's definitely Michigan trying to take a shot. We've seen it all year. When they get inside the 40-yard line, they like to take shots, and this is one of them right here. As far as I can tell from the limited film angle we have here. But he's looking downfield. You can see his eyes. He's looking for either of the tight ends. And he just calmly hits the check down. And he gets the one-on-one matchup on the check down, makes a good throw, and it's an easy completion to Poggi.
3:03 to go in the second quarter, and Cron Higgins scores on about a 10-yard touchdown run here with Michigan pulling on Wenu. And pulling Ben Mason to get out front side and take out everybody in their way.
Yeah, once again, Gentry kind of leading the way here. Great block, pinning on his down block here, pinning the end down inside, allowing no penetration, allows the winner to get around and kick out the defensive back. And Ben Mason with an absolute knockout block here on the cross block or pull block, whatever you want to call it. But he comes across and delivers a blow that it doesn't seem like this guy's going to recover from anytime soon. And Karan Higdon continues to run like a man possessed and barrels his way into the end zone for Michigan's second touchdown of the game. Well blocked all around.
29 seconds to go here, and Michigan ran the 2-minute drill with Brandon Peters, and here he connects with Chris Evans for his first career touchdown pass.
Yeah, Michigan catches Rutgers here in a little bit of a blitz. We have the trip set out to the right, and they're all going to run down, intending to create a pick for the potential man-to-man defense for Chris Evans in the wheel route. This looks like a one-man route to me. Rutgers does a little blitz up the middle, a little double A-gap blitz, and the defensive lineman for Rutgers ends up trying to cover Chris Evans, and that's a matchup I'll take all day. Pretty solid throw here by Peters, and a really good job of Chris Evans adjusting for the ball and gets in for the touchdown. Really well-designed play, and happened to catch Rutgers in probably the worst possible defense for this play.
12:02 to go in the third quarter. Michigan running some more power and getting Onwenu and the fullback Poggi out in front of Karan Higdon, which leads to this 40-yard gain.
Yeah, really nice play once again. Michigan really running a lot of this power this game. They have all season, but today's probably they had the most success with it. Gentry and McEwen do a good job of pinning their guys down inside, allowing Onwenu to pull around for pretty much nobody, and Higdon had a nice big hole to get through here, and he's able to keep on.
You've been saying a lot of that with the tight ends, that they've done a really nice job. I know it's Rutgers, but they've done a really good job. It's probably the best that they've done blocking.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with all the tight ends blocking, especially today's game against Rutgers. Gentry did a really nice job, and McEwen's been doing a really nice job the last 3 or 4 weeks we've seen. And they're showing up in the run game. There's a reason why we're running so many 2 and 3 tight end sets.
4:54 to go in the third quarter, and there's a lot of impressive plays for Brandon Peters in his first career, his first career opportunity. But this might have been his best, getting flushed out of the pocket, throwing on the run, throwing on his back foot, and hitting Sean McEwen for a 15-yard gain.
So Peters here, I think he feels the pressure on the backside here that gets around the left tackle, and he doesn't panic with his feet. He just kind of calmly does a little soft roll out of the pocket to the right, makes a great throw on the run to Sean McEwen, who did a good job staying alive, getting across the field, and throws a real catchable ball. And McEwen here makes a really nice grab. And it's a really nice combination, good throw, didn't panic, all around a positive play.
And something you and I have pointed out too is that when Brandon Peters gets outside the pocket, he runs on a parallel, like to the line of scrimmage. He doesn't do what John O'Korn does, which takes him about 15 yards backwards and makes those throws impossible.
Yeah, he does a really nice job, staying, like you said, staying parallel to the line of scrimmage and not losing too much ground when throwing the football outside the pocket.
About 54 seconds to go, and Rutgers runs a little bit of a different variation of the option, and this doesn't fool Devin Bush, who every once in a while, again, reminds us the type of player that he has been and will continue to grow into.
Yeah, I mean, Rashawn Gary just doing his responsibility here. He's going to take the quarterback and make the quarterback pitch, and the tight end is going to block up outside on the safety or cornerback, and Devin Bush is free to roam like we'd love to see him do in Don Brown's defense, and he flies the football and makes a tackle for about a 4-yard loss here.
50-yard touchdown run by Karan Higdon. Really, really good blocking here from a bunch of different guys, Benny.
Yeah, so Michigan actually throws out the unbalanced line to the left there. They swing the right tackle, Bushel Beatty over to left tackle, kick Mason Cole out to the tight end position. He blocks down, throws a really nice block on the defensive end. And Gentry, once again, doing a great job blocking. And big, huge hole for Higdon to run through, but the icing on the cake here that really springs this play is the wide receiver Shanley coming in, digging out the safety, and there's no one there for a winner to block, and
Higdon's off
to the races.
About 8:34 to go or so in the fourth quarter, and what you want to see out of a quarterback like Brandon Peters is some progression throughout the game, continually make the smart play. And here, facing a 3rd and 6, he checks down to his running back in the flat. There was a catchable ball to Karan Higdon, who's able to get upfield for a first down.
Yeah, Michigan's going to run a little play action here, and Brandon Peters makes the good quick throw to the flat to Cron-Higdon with just enough yardage to gain the first down here on third and 5. And, you know, it's a really good, his first option, I think, here is a tight end, and he is covered up, so Peters comes right back down to the running back, Higdon, who makes a good catch and picks up the first down.
This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you what word best describes Brandon Peters' debut as Michigan's starting quarterback. 57% of you said promising. 19% of you said efficient. I think either of those first two are, well, sufficient. 14% of you said necessary. I think that's true too. 10% of you said so-so. I don't know how you can say so-so. I don't, which is why 90% of you did not. So again, follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. This week's question of the week: is Georgia's win over Notre Dame better than any win Bama has so far since FSU has tanked and maybe was never really a top 5 team to begin with? Well, I don't know that we know. Florida State was never really a top 5 team to begin with. And I think we as Michigan fans have learned that you have to be so much better than everybody else to survive not being good at quarterback. It's the most important position in the sport, and there is no close second. And Florida State really is playing a guy right now that wasn't even a 4 or 5-star recruit, was supposed to be a developmental quarterback, but some of the other guys either flamed out or transferred. So I think just as we saw Michigan's team rally when Brandon Peters was put in the game, I think you've seen Florida State's team kind of sink since they lost DeAndre Francois. But to answer the first part of the question, yes. Georgia's win at Notre Dame is one of the best wins in college football this year. In fact, when you look at best wins in college football this year, I would put Georgia's win at Notre Dame is either number 1 or it's number 2 behind Oklahoma's win at Ohio State. All right, Big Ten power ratings. Here's how I'd rank the teams 1 through 14 in the Big Ten. Ohio State takes over the top spot after their win against Penn State. But I think Michigan has a chance to really finish higher if Brandon Peters can continue to grow. And here comes Northwestern with their typical second-half surge under Pat Fitzgerald. Next, if I had a vote on the playoff committee, whose rankings are debuting tonight, we publish Michigan Podcast each Tuesday evening. My final 4 would be Georgia number 1 by virtue of their win at Notre Dame. I think that's better than any win Alabama has, and it's as good as anyone in college football has. I'd have Alabama number 2, Clemson at number 3 because they still have 2 wins against teams that I think will be in the top 20 of the playoff rankings. And I'd have Notre Dame at number 4, Oklahoma right behind them at 5 because they've got the other great win in college football this year, in my view, and that's at Ohio State, who, if you ask me, hey, where would I put them? I'd actually put them at number 6. I don't think, despite what the AP and coaches poll have, I don't believe Ohio State will be ranked ahead of Oklahoma. If we've seen one consistent thread in the 3 years of the college football playoff, it's they heavily value head-to-head when the two teams have the same record. Remember, last year Penn State had 2 losses, not 1. So yes, they had the head-to-head over Ohio State, but they had an extra loss. In this case, Oklahoma and Ohio State have the exact same record, and Oklahoma won at Ohio State last year, or this year, and Ohio State's win at Oklahoma last year is really what carried them all the way to the playoff. And then finally, my Heisman ballot, if I had to turn it in this week, I've still got Saquon Barkley number 1, but the gap has narrowed. The next 2 players on my ballot right now, Baker Mayfield and JT Barrett, the 2 quarterbacks that have, I think, the two best games any quarterback in college football has won and played this season. On deck for me would be Bryce Love at Stanford. And creeping up the board, Josh Adams of Notre Dame, who is just putting up explosive runs each and every week behind an outstanding offensive line. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. I want to thank our production team here at MP, Michael Spath of WTKA, Detroit Sports Podcast, all of you who watched and listened. We'll be back at it again next week. Until then, go Blue.